Hello, I'm Ray Duffy. Yes, it looks like that, but you pronounce it Duffy. And great to be the second Dubliner on the stage straight away. I have these two, so I don't get to go out for coffees too much. I work here I'm the design practice lead for City's Innovation Lab in Dublin. We are a global function from product, from design, from engineering, and we work within the TTS business. So City is lots of different types of businesses. It's one of the largest banks in the world. We're focused on cash management for some of the largest companies in the world, governments. So paying all the pension funds for the US government, making those kind of payments, or moving money around to make sure that you're building a giant engineering project in the Philippines or whatever it might be. So it's the very non-sexy, very unglamorous cash management enterprise. Somebody showed a picture of a SAP screen earlier on, and that's a lot of the type of stuff that people I work with have to deal with. So just in terms of the type of scale of City TTS, we move between about $3 and $10 trillion a day across over 100 countries. That's really what the core business does. What we do in the lab is looking at kind of next generation technologies and business models and how we might enable new types of growth. I'm not allowed to talk about any of the stuff I do in work, sadly, but I am going to talk about some of the kind of thinking that maybe underpins some things that we look at. So what I'm going to talk about is these things, Uber, which is such, I suppose, almost a cliche, but really push-button services and what they might mean and what they might do. So I just want to say it's 5 o'clock. It's been a really engaging day, so thanks everybody who's actually still here at 5 o'clock. And I know there's 2 more speakers, so it's really appreciated people sticking around. So I want to talk about this, but actually really what I want to talk about is this. So Uber just last week has hired the ex-EU commissioner. And why that's important? Well, Uber's just been banned in Sweden about 3 hours ago in 2 cities. I want to talk about this. So somebody showed a picture about Uber's beautifully designed screen with their cars, how many cars are near you. Actually, that's not potentially the number of cars near you. It's a visual effect. And if that is a visual effect, then it has massive legal implications on is Uber a taxi company or a peer-to-peer network? And that's about a lot of challenges. And I also want to talk about this. Uber in China and its ongoing kind of war with Daddy Bando, and how it's been removed from WeChat. So WeChat is one of the largest social networks in the world. I think it's like something like 650 million active data users. And they've been kicked off it 3 times. Why? Because the people who own WeChat also own Uber's largest competitor. And one thing is, I think all of these things mean it's not just about the button, but it's about all the stuff behind the button, is one of this question. Is that $64 billion startup, is it just a feature on somebody else's platform? And what does that might mean for design and for also all of those businesses that we might be working in, and us as individual designers? Many people might be familiar with the idea of microservices, so discrete pieces of software that come together, talk via APIs to deliver a service for a user. That's kind of how a lot of, I suppose, contemporary products and services that we deliver via technology, digital experiences work. I think there's something that's happening that's almost the inverse of this. So it's something called Macroservices. So it's not just about discrete pieces of technology, but Uber is also taking all of this really complex stuff, people, regulation, institutional vested interests, and packaging all of that stuff down to one teeny tiny little touch point, a single button, 1 or 2 very small buttons. And what's really interesting is they mightn't even own that relationship. That button just might exist on somebody else's platform. And that's maybe really challenging, where you don't even own the relationship with the user, and you need to pull all of this stuff together. And this is very reflective, I suppose, of all of the stuff that we might work in heavily regulated industries, like in financial services where I work, but potentially also in government, in healthcare, and insurance. So John Takara, who's a design kind of theorist, he talks about the idea of macroscopes. in the same way that the scientists have microscopes to look at very small things, how can we create macroscopes to understand these very large aggregations and what they all look like when they come together? I think that's one of the big challenges of contemporary design inside heavily regulated industries. Because, you know, whether you say, well, I work on product, and product sounds very macho and cool, and yeah, I make products, or I make services, or I make platforms or systems, so everybody wants to be into platforms and systems now. All of those things are collapsing in on each other, whether you're Uber or you're somebody like Deliveroo, who is basically a food delivery platform. All of those things are collapsing and coming together. So nowadays, I don't think you can just get away and say, well, I just make buttons, I just make screens, because as those things all kind of flatten, you're not just about making the screens, but you're also part of the wider value proposition business model. So yeah, Deliveroo, it's a beautiful screen and it's a beautiful interaction, but it's a really shitty job for somebody. So this is the employment contract that they have to sign. So under no way are these people considered workers for legal reasons. And I think that's one of the challenges as designers. How do we balance that? Because what we do design on the front end is absolutely reflective on the back end, and what happens on the back end very heavily influences on what we might do on the front end. And you might just think, well, yeah, that's the world, man. It's 21st century. It's disruption. Just get on with it. And that's maybe true. Yes, there's lots of, sometimes regulation can be a moat. But for particular industries, so financial services, as I said, healthcare and government, actually, being disrupted isn't always a good thing. I'm from Ireland. I'm from Dublin. We got disrupted pretty bad during the financial crisis. It's not fun. One of the things about disruption is it cuts both ways. So these two guys here, this is DoddFrank, two US senators, and they brought in a law, I think in 2012, looking at kind of regulation of the financial industry. And it's a heavily dense legal document. There's, I don't know, section 1052 or section 13F. Lots of really, really detailed legalistic type stuff. But this kind of legislation directly impacts the usability requirements, the design requirements of what might happen, what you might need to do if you work in a bank in the US, but primarily even if you're US based anywhere in the world. Here's another guy who's really disrupting, and he's probably disrupting most of the companies that we might work with. This is Max Schrems. He's the guy who took Facebook to court in the EU over sending his EU data to the US under safe harbor. And now this idea that you can just take a bunch of data and mash it together and do whatever you want with, because the user somewhere clicked a box that says, I accept. I think that's going to move away. And actually, as the world, it's moving less away from maybe Silicon Valley style's understanding of privacy and data protection, and more towards kind of de facto European understandings. That's going to cause us all a lot of real challenges. So, these things they're happening, and they do have impact on us. So really what I want to try to say in this talk is there's hard lines and there's rules in the world and there's boundaries, and you can't just wish them away as a designer. Often you kind of think, if that just wasn't there, it'd be just great. Actually engaging those is, I think, one of the key capabilities of what designers need to do. So I want to talk a little bit about maybe thinking about designing for macroservices and some things that you might want to look at, and certainly things that I think a lot about, and not just in my work, but also as I look around what's happening in the wider industry. So one is understanding not just the what, but the why. Why is that thing the way it is? That's really, really crucial. So Steve Batty earlier on talked about different contexts and how we move at different scales of interaction. Similar to what he said, by talking about this stuff, I'm not saying that actually getting the front end and the pixels right isn't important. It absolutely is. But it's understanding about why they need to be right and what's happening. So you often see this kind of stuff. So here's loads of different boarding passes from Dribble. And they look beautiful. They look really, really great. But they look really great. And sometimes you kind of think, well, what's the design process that sat behind these? And when you contrast that with something like this, this is not a great photo of the new Ryanair boarding pass, But it's, you know what? It's an A4 printed boarding pass. It's not a beautifully designed object. But it's a really, I think, really cleverly designed object. And so this is done by the Ryanair labs in Dublin, Lindsay Duncan and Angus Deveron. They had a really great Medium post about their whole process of designing this. And if you really want to see what, you know, research-driven UX looks like, talking to your users, iterating really quickly, and then delivering that in a very short space of time to 30 million users a year. Read that Medium post. Sadly, it's been taken down. So they put it up. I guess somewhere in their marketing department suddenly went, what? But they do say it's going to be up again in the next week or so. There's some really nice things that are happening here. So, you know, it's printed the way it's printed, so you can fold it up into quarters and put it inside your passport. Ryanair. Who here knows Ryanair? Who's flown on a Ryanair flight? It's good, isn't it? It's brilliant. I flew Turkish Airways, and it was just a shock. As somebody who flew Ryanair is flying most of the time. This is the lowest of the low-cost providers. These people make their staff buy their own bottles of water. You're not allowed to plug in your phone in the Ryanair headquarters because that's costing electricity, and that's going to impact on their bottom line. But it's a really, really great piece of design, I think, because it doesn't just, it's not just about looking good, but it's about understanding what's happening. There's 22 legal requirements that have to be on this document, and it has to be used by lots of different people, not just the user, but also a whole bunch of different types of stakeholders within the airport. So it's not just a piece of paper. Actually, it's 102 years of negotiation and regulation and capitalism, all boiled down to, you know, 297 by 210 millimeters. And that's really important, understanding what all of those things are. If we want to be designing, we need to engage with that. So for me, this is the type of thing that needs to be part of people's design brief. This is the Turkish anti-money laundering and know your customer quick reference guide from PwC. And there's one, PwC have one of these for every, 192 countries. But it's all the stuff that says, why do you need to ask for somebody's phone number or whatever that might be? And there's massive complexity. So this is just in Turkey. But when you think about going global, how this might alter across so many different countries. So I think this is the type of thing that you need to kind of get into, go deep, if you really want to actually be crafting really great user experiences. Because it's great to craft very amazing user experiences that work in a, frankly, US-centric world where everybody has a credit card. But Michael from PayPal was talking about India. I know one thing in India is, I think it's credit card penetration is something like 5% or something like that. It's a very different world. And it was really great to see the talk from Iran to understand the difficult cultural context. So I'll speed up. So Louise Down, head of the Government Digital Service for the UK, she says, you know, the job of a service designer in government is 90% archaeology. And absolutely, I think most of the work that I do is archaeology. It's about understanding legacy systems, legacy technology, and legacy policy. I was asking somebody, why is that way? Why is something the way it is? And they said, well, we bought a company in 1978. I wasn't born in 1978, and I'm still dealing with some of the challenges around a thing there. The second thing is balancing friction and agency. So I'll speed up a bit. People always talk about this, seamless experiences. Every product wants to have a seamless experience. You know, and it's always some guy like this trapped inside of some electronic beehive. And then this happens, you know? Verified by Visa. I just want to buy shoes, and I have this thing. And actually, but there's really good reasons why that's there. We can't just create seamlessness. Actually, what we need to be thinking is about better seams. You know, there's lots of different ways people try and get around this. This is the old Ryanair website where if you didn't want to buy travel insurance, they had "Do not insure me" stuck somewhere in the list of countries. I used to fly Ryanair every week for 3 years, and because they even moved this where it is in the list of countries, I still used to get caught out and occasionally pay it. These kind of dark patterns is probably not the way you want to go. This kind of trade-off between friction and agency is something we always have to think about. You know, when you place the user at the heart of it. So Apple, there's recently a story there last week about some composer who said Apple stole all his music, it uploaded to the cloud and deleted it off his computer. It didn't, actually. But in trying to create a frictionless experience, it actually gave the impression that all his music had been deleted, and looks to almost deny him agency. And this is my favorite one. So this is a guy I know, John Lynch. He ordered this thing. It's a beer paddle. I don't know what that is. From Amazon, and probably lots of people have had this experience. It's just a huge box for this tiny thing. And, you know, if you're trying to create an amazing user experience, but you're actually creating a really crap experience for the person who has to work behind that, then that's maybe not a great experience. There's more than just the user. So why does the Amazon person just take this thing and throw it into the box that's there? Well, they have to do an order every 13 seconds, or 30 seconds. The average Amazon worker works 18 kilometers a day trying to make orders. So trying to understand that idea of, well, how much agency should a worker be able to choose what is the most appropriate box here for it? So there's loads of quotes I could have pulled out here. This one from Anne Galloway I think is really good. Is actually, you know, look at seams. They're the places where interesting things happening, where there's gaps, where there's things kind of crossing over those boundaries. And rather than trying to cover them up, maybe it's a lot more about creating beautiful seams. And finally, just being clear about, are you a platform or a feature? I hear a lot about platform plays a lot at the moment. I think these guys do it really well. So I don't know if anybody here is staying in Istanbul via Airbnb, but they do a really good thing of, you know, connecting two different types of people in a platform. Except there's things like this happening. So in New York, 25% of Airbnb hosts rent 3 or more properties. So they're effectively hoteliers who are just buying up properties and using Airbnb to circumvent planning regulations. And that's just not a problem with branding, like, oh, it's affecting our story around we're helping people connect across the world. It's actually a real problem around the fundamental value proposition of that business. And you know, you can notice the site, it's not engaging around that. It's still telling you, it's still portraying almost the lie of that it's all about you know, connecting individuals. The flip side of maybe just platforms is features. And I don't know if people don't know Intercom. I think they're one of the really, really interesting startups. They have a really great blog inside Intercom. You should check it out. And they're talking about this idea of the great rebundling. So how can you create deep integrations and create new types of value? So, you know, Intercom, it's about engaging your customers in a more kind of human way. They know they're never going to be the main thing. People don't come to Intercom to want to engage. They want to go off and do other things. They're a feature. They're a capability that they give to people. So deep integration is really, really, really vital. And then coming back to these guys, the whole thing in China with DUBHTHAIGH and Uber, it is the Game of Thrones for the sharing economy. Following this story is it's just really, really interesting. So Tencent, which is one of the biggest companies in the world, they own WeChat, biggest social media platform in the world, and they also DUBHTHAIGH, which has 73% of the car sharing market. Whoa, go back. Largest car sharing in China. So Uber is only about 10%. So Uber, you know, it can do all this nice stuff and beautiful graphics and everything like that, but fundamentally, if it's only going to be accessed via an order button on somebody else's platform, well, that puts it in a very challenging spot. It's neither a platform in itself, nor is it a feature. And the danger with that is, then you just become a utility. You become commoditized. And it becomes about service-level agreements and driving down costs. And that happens in lots of other industries. So I don't know who cleaned the toilets in this hotel, but probably the people who cleaned the toilets in Dublin Airport, they didn't work for Dublin Airport. They were probably a company who had the gig for 2 years, and the next time they'll be driven down on costs. And I think for lots of companies in digital companies in the new economy, that if they're not careful, that's where they might end up. And for designers as well, if we're not careful, if we're not either thinking about the wider kind of macro impacts of what we're doing, then we might end up there as well. So I think, you know, finishing with Tucker again, one of the big challenges, how can you make these systems intelligent and knowable? And Kevin Slavin talks about, you know, well, how you do that is actually by revealing, by building in friction, and not just being user-centered. It's not just about the user. It's about all of those other things. It's about the institutions. It's about the workers. It's about the legislative environment. And it's about that wider social, cultural, and economic and political context that we're designing these things in. So 3 things to maybe think about if you want to think about maybe working in heavily regulated industries. Go deep. Really understand what's behind it. And so you're not just skinning something. Reveal the system. You can do that in beautiful ways, but don't try to obscure what's happening, because there can be real legislative problems there. And be purposeful about what it is that you want to do. What is the goal of the business? And as designers, I think we need to be engaged in those conversations about what is the value we want to create. So thanks very much. I'm over my time, but if you wanted to catch me on Twitter, there I am. Thanks.